We are live. Thank you for your patience, Ashley. We're having YouTube issues. So I want to start working on the bill. And again, as I mentioned earlier, one of the best ways most organized ways I can think about doing it is to start really wide and then come back down by the end of the conversation in a week, to the point where we're done working on it. So the first thing I wanted to put on the table, we have until just before noon. So the first thing I wanted to put on the table is questions about if anybody has questions. I want to have as much as we can while we're dealing with the text, which we're not dealing with right now, but when we're dealing with the text, I want to be pretty focused about going through it. But when I open the floor up for conversation, I mean, I at some point in this hour, I want to ask Representative Labor again about your experience with the hospital and developing the program. Just if there's questions like that, I want us to be able to have conversation around that, which is some experience. And but also just like yesterday's conversation, if we have questions in places that we want to ask Damien as he's sitting here, just a pin of an asterisk next to it for something that we have to settle in on, and like a work site, there will be a punch list as we keep working through it, and we'll just keep hopefully scratching stuff off the punch list. So with that, questions that anybody have right this minute, again, knowing that we're going to hear about fraud after lunch. We're going to hear from the administration in the next, hopefully 24 hours. We're going to hear from, and that includes when I say the administration, it's not just about the plan, it's also tax commissioner is going to come in and talk about, we're going to ask him about what does this mean? We had that question from the attorney yesterday. What does this mean to the tax department to have to take in an extra millions of dollars and have to shunt it from tax department to whatever fund it may go to? So we'll hear in the next 24 hours, we'll hear about that. And then probably starting this afternoon with some stuff, if we have time, we'll start looking at the text again, and then starting Thursday, we'll go through it again. So questions? Yeah.
I guess not really a question, but just a comment before we really dive in. Earlier you had spoke about how, we look at it as it's a benefit for your business, it's a benefit for the employees. The one thing that maybe I'm thinking about it incorrectly. It seems like it would be a benefit to your business right now, if you offer something similar to this. That would be a draw towards your business. On Friday, one of the people talked about how they just pay them what they do, which would be a great magnet for your company, as if you're looking for employees and if you're looking for employees to stay. I don't doubt that at all. I think that's a benefit your company offers. When you create a program like this, now what's the magnet for that company? So you're gonna have to go find something else that costs them more money to provide a benefit to that. I want to say it's taking away a benefit, because it would stay the same to employees that work at that company. It's not taking away a benefit from them, but you kind of are taking away a benefit that kept employees there. That may have been, I'd much rather work down the road 5 miles closer to my house, but it's benefit here, so I'm gonna stay. Well, that's every company now. Do you lose that as a company kind of thing? Like, is that not a draw for your business that you're gonna have to go find something else that you go above and beyond on? Just a thought that, you're kind of losing that benefit that draws people to your company, wants them to stay.
Representative James and Justice Thompson.
Thanks, Rep. Parsons. That's something I've been thinking about a lot too. is, how this benefits employers. It's very obvious to me how this benefits employees. So I've been trying to wrap my head around the question of why I believe that this is a really significant benefit to employers. And the framework that I have kind of been operating within is that with this bill, we would define what we consider to be essential leave that every Vermont worker should be entitled to get. So you kind of set a baseline, right? Like, this is what we believe in this bill. Every worker should have the opportunity to receive at whatever point in their life they might need it. So you set the term level playing field really resonates for me, because right now you have a lot of businesses or some businesses that can offer that, and so they have a competitive advantage, and the vast majority of businesses that can't. So we got a bunch of people fighting down here, we got everybody up here who's able to operate above that level playing field, right? Like, they can attract and retain with extra benefits. Got everybody down here trying, scrapping, not able to do it. If we bring everybody up to that floor and say, this is what we believe everybody in Vermont, every business should be able to offer and every employee should be able to receive, then you've sort of lifted all boats, because the companies that then can offer different or more benefits they're free to do that in the competitive marketplace. We've provided everybody with the floor, and then, hey, I'm going to also, recruit and retain by offering, a 401k, or I'm going to offer your daughter's braces, or I don't know what. So that's sort of, I'm glad you raised that question, because it's really the question that I've been rolling my head around, and that's a framework that I've been using that I think kind of addresses your thought, or it would be one response to your thought. I don't know if that's what you're talking about.
Similar, yeah. I even understand what you're saying.
Representative Chastain?
I've also been mulling over that question, and I think one of the things I heard today about 1/4 of women age 46 to 62, whatever the age was, are primary caregivers. And what I'm thinking, big picture, and I don't know if this benefits all employers equally, but it seems to me like this provides the opportunity for more people who are not in the workforce now to rejoin the workforce, easing the employee crunch. And that's a broad picture, but that's one potential benefit that I see.
Just to clarify, she said primary caregivers for their aging parents, the sandwich generation.
Right. But I mean, so that being one small group, but I know that there are people who say, I have this, I never know when my shingles are going to kick in, and I can't hold down a job. That sort of thing. So I do see it being as a tool to bring more people into the workforce that are not able to participate now. No idea how you quantify that.
Representative.
I see it as an equalized playing field if you offer it to all. However, not all small businesses can feel they can afford to do it. Some will probably fold.
When you talked about your experience with the hospital, can you just start with that and just
Sure.
because I think you, if I remember correctly, it touches on the plan was similar, at least in compensation, to what is being proposed by the administration. And that was a question: is 60% enough? Is 80% enough? Is 100% enough? And just if you could just regale us, I guess, with some of the experience that you had, I would appreciate it.
Well, we had a HR committee put together the want list, if you will, for the employees. And then we went to private insurance to get bids and quotes for it. So we went through a TPA, third-party administrator, to take care of the program. The final outcome was that it was medical leave, but at 60%. Then you have the issue of employee contribution and employer contribution. Some of that is not taxable if the employee is paying for it. So the 60% would actually be more than 60% fractionally because of the component that the employee is paying for. It's been very well received. I mean, at the same time, we converted over to PTO. So based upon incremental years of service, the more years of service, the more hours of PTO were given to that employee. And but it was a use it or lose it tied to a rollover date. So if
Your
you
PTO was.
yes, so if you didn't use, say you had 250 hours and you used 125, 125 got paid on a good year would get paid out. The balance would get paid out at 50% of the value. So they got a cash check. If you timed that around April 15th, they were some awful happy people. So that was our experience, and it's been very well received. But that's only one institution. We weren't spread around with, say, correctional department, or spread around with education, or spread around with state employees, maintenance, DOT, et cetera. It was just one building. This complicates that.
Yep. No, that's a good point, but it is, but the private insurance, we're in a position, and again, I'm not sure we're going to hear what a rate would be in a contract negotiation. I don't know that we're privy to that information. But I think the one point here is, so what about private insurance? Is it more or less expensive than this and that's on the expense side. I hear what you're saying about the complexity of who's involved.
Right. The expense side will be calculated out by the insurance company. Here we have two unknowns. Either proposal, 66 or the administration's proposal. We do not know the cost.
Right.
That could be very substantial, depending upon the utilization of it. Some people have so much pride, they will not call in sick. They will work sick. We ran into some of that. Thank God they were groundskeepers, not spreading it around very far, but you do have that.
Yes.
So we talk about the this is not in response to you, but we talk about the additional burden, the tax burden for employees and employers in this. And I just want to check my math with everybody.
Sure.
But I did $60,000 a year. And if you're paying 0.275%, which is half of the estimated cost in 66, coming up with $165 a year. And so that says to me, the concern about additional burden is inflated. $165 is not a break point for if you're earning $60,000 a year. And I just want to make sure I'm doing the math right. And Dennis has done the math too.
That's right.
Just so that when we say burden, we know what we're talking about. Or contribution, right, to make it a more neutral term.
Multiply that by 6,000.
Well, I'm thinking
Then
multiplying it by
then your
by
burden
3
comes-
employees.
Right.
Because we talk about small employers. And so, and again, if it's a general store, you're not paying your cashier $60,000 a year, probably, I hope not. But if you have 3 employees or 5 employees, and so your contribution as an employer is $750 a year. Okay, it's a lot cheaper than that, that's a couple of paid days.
You can go first.
Just only that much of my thinking has and continues to revolve primarily around Vermont small business owners. And, a firm that has 6,000 employees, I would assume has other programs in place, or maybe they already offer their own program that is going to be approved by the division as comparable or equal. If we've got companies out there with 6,000 employees and aren't offering some fairly competitive benefit package already that this could net out against, I'm surprised, I guess. But I don't know.
I'm just describing the 6,000 as being in this house, if you would. State employees.
Oh, right, yes. Mhm. Gotcha.
Representative Lamont?
Thank you. So in this example, I'm just curious, so would what you just explained, Representative Labor, would that not be considered comparable, equal or comparable? I want to understand how this would undermine that system, because that's where there's like a disconnect on how this could undermine something that seems like it would, in my brain, seems like it would be equal or comparable benefit. It sounds like a pretty good benefit. But I mean, maybe I'm not good at math. We've already established that.
So I think if you were to, again, not knowing what exactly and how much that program, what it was, what it covered, what the actual benefit was. When we talk about what happened 4 years ago, we ended up, the bill that got vetoed 4 years ago did not have personal medical leave in it, right? After this whole process, it started with personal medical leave for up to 12 weeks. But it was taken out of the bill prior, so there was a certain price tag involved with that, but it was incomplete. So I don't know, not knowing what the private plan is.
Right.
In the bill, what would happen is that if this program as is were in place, DFR would, if somebody came up and said, well, this hospital has this private program, and I don't know if they would let anybody who's already been paying to continue paying, but if they came and said, hey, we found this program that works for our employees, it has this, what we heard from the treasurer from his experience at DFR is that they would try to do as many apples to apples, but that there may be different comparisons. Like their 8 weeks might be equivalent to our 12 weeks if there's something else going on, whether it's cheaper, less expensive, or there may be, they're going to do the comparison between the two. Again, not knowing how we would handle a previously held insurance policy, I don't know if we would make them take on this one, or they could simply end their contract and sign and be included in the state program.
And I would think that it would have to be that previous program or whatever would have to also have the built-in job security, because that's the other important part of this is it's the compensation, but it's also the job safety,
Right, so
right?
the insurance program is actually layered on top of the job protection.
Okay,
So the job protection already exists.
Okay.
For companies that have 10 or 15 employees, depending on what
Right.
leave you're asking for.
right,
And Damien, can you just, 10 days for blank leave and 15 days for blank leave?
I mean, 10 employees.
10 employees, sorry.
So it's 10 employees who average at least 30 hours a week for parental leave, 15 employees who average at least 30 hours a week for family care leave and medical leave. So, and if that average 30 hours a week is important, because if you have a business that runs with a lot of part-time employees working 10 or 20 hours a week, you could have 25 employees, but you still wouldn't be covered unless you've got some of those 3/4 to full-time employees.
Right, so that's still, it limits the amount of businesses that have that job protection. So the money part of it is new
uh-huh,
to be layered on top of the family leave. But we're also proposing to change the family leave so it affects all employers who have at least one employee.
okay.
Right now, only 15%, right, Damien, of Vermont businesses are required to. I thought you said 85% were exempt.
Roughly. It's really hard to know the exact number because our Department of Labor's Labor Market Information Division tracks employees, but they don't track hours that the employees work. So we know that roughly 80% of Vermont employers have 9 or fewer than 10 employees. And then roughly 90% have fewer than 20. What we don't know is how many of those employers are going to qualify on the 30 hours or more average. So my best sort of guess, with really no firm basis except for those raw employee numbers, is somewhere around 15% of employers are covered by both, and it might be a little more than 15% for the parental leave, but it's hard to say. It could be as high as 20%. But
So 30
just don't.
30 hours I seem to remember that when the Affordable Health Care Act went in, the number for required coverage was 28 hours. I may have that wrong, but I think that so like a large national department store whose employment policies may say you get to work up to 26 hours a week,
Mhm.
they wouldn't be covered because they're not averaging 30 hours a week.
Right, yeah, so if you have a business model where you have staff coming in 2 or 3 days a week for 8-hour shifts, then you may not be covered even though you have a lot of employees. If you have a mix of full-time and part-time, you very well might be covered. It's really going to depend on the business model, how that employer likes to do things, and what the company's needs are. But you will have some employers that have, for example, 12 employees, but because 4 of them are very part-time, they don't fall within the coverage for parental leave.
Representative LaBounty Krasno,
Just so that I can understand, so let's say I'm working for an employer, they got 10 people, 10 employees. The maximum an employee work is 25 hours. So I would not be covered underneath this plan,
Under existing law,
under existing law.
you would not.
Okay.
If you capped all of your employees, say at 24 hours a week, which is 3 8-hour shifts,
Okay,
then you would avoid coverage under the existing law. Under the proposal in H66, you'd be covered because you had more than one or more
Yeah,
employees. So there's no hour
Okay,
counting in the proposal in H66.
okay.
So,
There's no hour counting?
not for purposes of employer coverage. So,
Okay, no, Krasnow,
lot of
Lamont,
places.
Chestnut Howard, and then Chestnut Tangent.
I'll be brief. But yeah, okay, so I was just double checking again on that with the, because I was thinking about, like a bagel shop in South Burlington that, right, so if someone's working like a couple days a week and then they, I don't know, so in the current bill, they'll be covered. But this is like a extreme hypothetical, but could employers cut people's hours to not?
So you're talking under the current law? So the current law requires that you have 10 or more, or 15 or more working an average of 30 hours a week. So
Okay.
under the current law, there's nothing that prevents an employer from deciding to limit employee hours, to limit their coverage under one of these laws. So it becomes a thing where when people are applying for jobs, they may find out that it's a job that's a 3-day-a-week job.
Well, right, because I
So-
think all these signs like $25 an hour, but then they only give you like 1 or 2 days, you just don't know. So, but under H66, those folks would not be,
Those folks would be eligible for coverage. So under H66, there are, actually, if you look at the documents I sent you today, so Ron, I'm gonna join the meeting here so I can pull this up. It'll be easier. For purposes of just explaining to everyone.
And this is specific, this conversation is, again, the insurance is layered on top of the job protections. Job protections is what's important from FMLA. And, the money section doesn't have anything to do with job protection per se. You would still use FMLA or PFLA, what we call our state is PFLA, is, you'd still have to qualify in the same way with these same qualifications, but we are changing them
right,
at the unpaid level.
Ron, can
Right.
you make me a co-host, please? No worries.
and refresh my memory, and this will be helpful when I'll look at the summaries tonight. So folks who, they have to work at the place of employment for a certain amount of time to even be,
Yes.
Yep, so
You
there,
have to put in, well, you have to be working, right? Damien, if I'm working at Bagel Shop A, and I've been working there for 3 years, and I've been paying into it, paid in the 15 months,
mhm.
just because I'm still working there. But when I leave Bagel Shop A and I go to Sandwich Shop B, there's no waiting period because
okay,
because tied to my social security number is proof that I have paid into the system.
okay,
Yeah, so, so there are really two things. If you, there we go. Okay, there are really two things. So under the current law, you can see here, in order to be eligible for job protected leave, first you have to work for a covered employer. So we just talked about that 10 or 15 employee threshold. The next thing is you have to have worked for that employer for at least a year and an average of 30 hours a week. Okay, and this is roughly equivalent to the federal requirements, which are at least a year, and I think it's 1,250 hours. And I can double check that, but either way, you have this, basically you have to have been with that employer for a year and be working in a relatively significant position. You can't be a very part-time employee. Under H66, which is the right-hand column here, you have a new option, which is that if you've been employed by an employer, so you're employed by the employer and you've earned wages that are subject to Vermont income tax in 2 of the last 4 completed calendar quarters.
Great.
In other words, you're eligible for the paid leave program. And if you're eligible for the paid leave program, you're also entitled to job protected leave. So what this means is that you could be a relatively new employee with an employer who wouldn't have otherwise qualified, but because you've been working in Vermont for long enough to qualify for paid leave, you're now entitled to job protection. So really we have for Vermont employees, probably the easiest way to job protection is just having worked in Vermont for 2 of the last 4 calendar quarters.
Okay.
The other option has been left in there for employees of a larger regional or national company who relocate to Vermont. So they may have worked for that employer for 10 years, but they just moved to the Burlington, Vermont or White River Junction office, something like that. And now they're working in Vermont, but they haven't been here for 2 full calendar quarters, but they would have qualified under our old job protection law. And so that kind of gives coverage to both groups. Most likely, those employees of the larger company are also going to be covered under FMLA, but there is that chance that they work for a small regional company that has, let's say, 20 employees. It's covered under the Vermont law, but not covered under FMLA, so they would still be entitled to the job protected leave. So that's the probably the biggest change apart from the employer numbers here, and I'll scroll up so you can see both. So yeah. Questions?
Yes.
Can I take down the document?
I did not finish my train of thought. So, okay, can I have like 2 minutes just to like ramble real quick? Okay, so just to be clear, because thank you for clarifying. This does help clear up things a little bit. And my line of questioning was just to understand, this is going to level the playing field for the folks who weren't qualified, because I feel like what I've heard from folks is that businesses were sort of doing the things we just discussed. We're keeping, employees at under 24 hours so that they didn't have to buy in. And then I'm also curious about per diem workers. And it's just like, here's my thing. I'm listening to all the conversations that have happened thus far, all the testimonies that have happened thus far. And thinking back to this morning, it piqued my interest when someone was just talking about business owners, as in, I never considered, I did because we talk about it as an income. But when we're talking about this, for some reason, it didn't register in my brain that like people who have like Airbnbs or whatever would be considered business owner. And I was like, oh, okay, well now we're talking like it's kind of changing the narrative of what does a business owner mean and who are the businesses and the employees and all these types of things. And so I get to thinking about the individual folks who do things like that, or the how would this play out for traveling nurses or things like that, and so it just really just piqued my brain a little bit, and I'm just like, okay, so that's what my line of questioning was of when I was inquiring about the hours and the coverage, is just, I hear how it protects the employees, and I actually, now that you mentioned that, I have concerns about the whole buy-in for if you've worked in Vermont in general and not with that business, because that makes me feel uncomfortable, because I feel like you should have longevity with your business, like that's a privilege. So, for new employees of a business to be able to, but to activate something from their current employer based off of employment with a previous employer feels weird to me. So that was and thank you for clarifying that, because that seems, that was curious to me.
Right, that's the policy choices there is stop with the hand raised.
Sorry.
No, the policy choices you're testing is like going to the supermarket. I can go for 3 items without a list, but it's the 4, forget it. So what I'm hearing is that you're uncomfortable with the notion that I can take a new job and automatically, if I've worked in Vermont and paid into the system, so I can prove that I've paid into the system if I have a serious illness or I need to take time off. But I go to work in a new job and oops, I have a serious illness, that employer is somehow on the hook, or that I'm taking advantage of the new employer because is that?
I wouldn't say that it's taking advantage per se. I would just say, I feel like there should be some onus and buy-in onto, I like the accrued PTO, right? Like, I just feel like the connection between the employer who's paying for that benefit, if they have to pay out for an employee, I just don't know where the leverage is.
Yeah, so the insurance program is state. And not
Okay.
the employees, or not the employers.
Not the employers,
It's
okay.
in essence, while the employer is paying into the system and has to provide the work protection, everything else comes from the insurance program. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you. Okay, that feels better.
All right, so
Okay, thank you.
Howard, Chestnut Tangerman, James, Burrows, and if I remember, LaBounty, because we'll go to noon, folks, so.
So, under the current program, if there is an employee in an office that works 24 hours and the rest of the people in the office work 40 hours or they're exempt, but you're all working for the same company, and the person who's working 24 hours has worked previously for years in the state, they cannot take family leave.
Yeah, so I want to try to distinguish between the program, which is the insurance program, and the job protected leave law. So I want to make sure we're, for folks who are listening in or other folks at the table here, so I don't confuse anyone. So the current job protected leave law, which is, I think, what you're talking about. Under that law, let's say you work for a large national employer like REI. Okay, so big company, lots of locations. They have one store in the state. They probably cross the 10 and 15 employee threshold, even with that store in the state. They probably have enough full-time employees there between managers and bike mechanics and whatnot. They probably also have a lot of employees who are working 2 or 3 days a week. They work the Friday, Saturday, Sunday rush that the store deals with. So if you're one of those employees who works 2 or 3 days a week, even if you've worked for them for 10 years at some point in the future, under the current law, you would not qualify for job protected leave with them. So they don't have to keep your job if you leave. They might, but they might also replace you. So.
And they might also have a policy
Right.
that drops it down to a different level. I mean, again, we're talking about state
Right.
law, it provides a floor. And so they could say, geez, you've worked with us for 10 years, we'll either let you in or they could just say our employees at 22 hours qualify, but
Yeah,
that's the
and
range.
They may also have the luxury that some larger retail employers have too, where they can bring you back on when you're ready to come back on because there's always a need for staff. And it's not as big a disruption as with with a general store where you might have 5 staff. But the bottom line is if you're working for that employer, and it could be any employer like that, where you've got a Vermont location, they probably clear that threshold without even looking at whether they have employees out of state. So they've got that, they've got their 15 employees, 30 hours a week. And so they're covered under the Vermont law. But if you're working just 16 hours a week for them, you'll never qualify for job protected leave under the current law, no matter how long you work. You might at your regular job if you work a second job. So if that's not your only job, you might qualify for job protected leave there, but you won't with this second part-time job, if that makes sense. So.
Thank you.
Representative Justin Tanner.
2 questions. One, I hope is a quick yes or no.
Never.
Because this is the example that came up earlier, an Airbnb owner, lives out of state, has property here. Are they subject to Vermont income tax for their rental property?
That's
that in their home state.
That's a good question. I think business income earned in Vermont would be subject to Vermont business taxes, business income tax, but tax is not an area that I know a great deal about. So I'd have to defer to Abby on that. I can just check.
Go on for a yes or no, but
I struggle with yes and no's. So I'll give you an I don't know for sure. So.
Well, and part of the reason about the I don't know also is if that person is incorporated and, they're doing business as a business, is it, or is it coming back to them like as a personal income? And I don't know what the right schedules are in the tax, how one would report these as personal income versus like, I think if I had a summer camp like Representative Walls, former member who used his home his second home up on the lake as an example of they go at least for 2 weeks or a month a year during the summertime, but they also rent it out and they claim it as personal, it's all claimed as personal income rather than Walls Real Estate Incorporated, where they would file.
So my second question is, as many people do, they, piece together jobs. They work for REI on the weekends, they drive school bus in the morning and the afternoon, and they clean houses in between. So they're self-employed and have 2 other employers. Benefit, the wage compensation would be based on their tax filing, therefore their cumulative income. As written, would the school district, they as a self-employed cleaner and REI continue to make contributions through their leave period?
It's contributions are just on wages paid. So if you're not paying wages, you're not paying a contribution. Same way as you don't pay income taxes on someone who's you're not providing income to.
No contributions being made during a period of leave.
Right. So yeah, contributions to the state program are not happening. Under the job protection law, if they provide you with health insurance, they have to continue that under the same conditions as when you were working full-time. For example, if you have an 80-20 or 70-30 premium split, that continues. But as far as contributions to the program, those stop anytime they're not paying you a wage.
So that was the easier answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think what you were talking about, Sadia, is sort of the same kind of portability as far as a benefit goes as a 401k. So if you leave your one job and move to another job, you get to bring your 401k with you. And then the other thing I wanted to say was that, and then I was just not necessarily as relevant since it's by, but as Representative Labor can attest, I simply Googled US Department of Labor cost of replacing an employee. And the first thing that comes up is under the Society for Human Resource Management. And it says that it costs a company 6 to 9 months of an employee's salary to replace him or her. For an employee making $60,000 a year, that comes out to $30,000 to $45,000 in recruiting and training costs.
Representative LeBoun, you're responding to that? Or should I put you behind?
Put me behind.
Because I was
Really quick.
I was almost gonna get an alphabetical thing going here.
Okay, so let's say I work for an employer out of state,
Uh-huh.
okay? Where does that leave me?
You are not covered if you're not paying Vermont income tax on your wages. So you could be working in Vermont for an out-of-state employer, but if your income tax withholding is, say, in Massachusetts, because your employer is based in Massachusetts, and then you have to file that, I paid taxes out of state. So having worked in multiple states before, oftentimes what you'll do is you'll be filing with each state to say I paid taxes on that part of my income there, so I'm requesting an exemption from that, so forth, and I can't, forgive me if the terminology is wrong, but if you're paying those income taxes in another state, you're not covered in Vermont.
Now, could I, if I was self-employed, could I pay into it myself in that case?
If it's Vermont income, you could
Yeah.
pay into it.
Okay,
Yep.
because the employer
it's-
is out of Vermont, so he doesn't have to pay into it.
Right,
But-
but if you're self-employed and it's Vermont income, so if you're self-employed and it's Vermont income, you can't just say, hey, I'm working over here in Kansas.
Yeah.
But I really like the idea of wage replacement. So I'm gonna buy in, that doesn't work, but if you're paying Vermont income tax on your self-employment income, then you can buy into the program.
Well, wait a minute, so, I mean, if I'm a consultant and I have a client that's from Kansas,
You're paying Vermont income tax on that income
Right,
because you're
right.
domiciled in Vermont.
as a self-employed person, right?
Yes.
Right, so
Yeah,
that's, okay, I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure.
yeah.
And I just really,
Okay, sorry.
just really quick, probably, I'm guessing 4 or 5 years ago, we passed a law where you're required, depending on how many hours you work, X amount of personal time off. Was it like 2 or 3 days a year or whatever the case was? Would that supersede this? Would you still be eligible for those
For like personal time.
personal days if this passes and you get 12 weeks?
That's up to your employer. So your personal days, so this doesn't supersede the earned sick time law,
Okay, all
which
right,
still is there.
okay.
Because so it's important to keep in mind, earned sick time covers things like cold, flu, your kid's school closed, the adult daycare for your parent closed for the day. You have a doctor's appointment, outpatient treatment, something like that, that doesn't meet the serious health condition category. Once you get into that serious health condition category, then you could apply for paid leave benefits, with the assumption being that that's going to be more than a day or two.
All right.
And then, personal days, vacation days, CTO, that's all up to your employer. As long as they meet the state's sick time requirement.
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, Representative Labor, bring us home.
I think one has to distinguish between the insurance policies. You have the availability to have short-term disability policy combined with a long-term disability, and the number of days out will be the definitions of each.
Mhm.
I can't imagine a small business being able to afford those type of policies. But a chain Shaw's or Price Choppers, a large business. Probably afford both. We did at the hospital. But we only gave 60% on the paid leave, not 100%.
And that's a policy choice, so.
That's policy choice.
It's a policy choice, and again, depending on what category the payments came out of, and, you know, like we've been talking about, like trying to understand the difference between workers' comp and unemployment, if the employees paid, if the employers shared the payments and all
Or
of those.
fully funded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna stop here. We're gonna pick up this conversation when we have time. Ashley, I'm gonna have a question for you, just in terms of your experience with companies or in the industry, just talking about CTO and how people might be using CTO, and the fact that over the last 5 years, CTO is a concept that's kind of mashed together vacation time, paid sick days, whatever people used to call all their different benefits. But we'll talk about that after our witness this afternoon.
What's CTO?
Combined time off.
Thank you.
Sorry.
PTO is parent teacher organization. Or paid time off.
Yep.
All right, thanks, everybody. We'll see you at